Hey there, my name is Renee Hobbs and welcome to the Media Education Lab's online webinar series. Today, there we go.
My name is Renee Hobbs
and
welcome to
what's going on there?
Media Education
Hold on here.
Online.
I hear the feedback from the YouTube stream. Sorry about that. Today we're here with Nathan Phillips and Virginia Killian Lund. And we are talking a little bit about collaboration, socio-emotional learning, media arts. And I think we should just take it away. I'm going to be letting people in to the meeting. Our general structure for these programs is Nathan and Virginia are going to talk for about 30 minutes. Then they're going to give us a rich, juicy, interesting question. We're going to break up into small group discussions, talk for about 15 minutes, come back and do some synthesis. So Virginia and Nate, take it away.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Nate Phillips. Let me share my screen so we can get started. I am an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago in literacies, the College of Education.
And I'm Virginia Killian Lund, and I'm an assistant professor at University of Rhode Island in the College of Education and Professional Studies, in the Alan Sean Feinstein College of Education and Professional Studies. I've heard I have to say the whole thing.
So today we're going to be talking about what we call careful collaboration in media arts education. And we're really thankful to Renee and the Media Education Lab and the opportunity to share with you some of our work. I was a high school teacher 20 years ago when I first met Renee. So really thankful for her work in the Media Education Lab and the impact in my work over lots and lots of years. And we're really excited to be here.
We wanted to get a sense of who we're in conversation with today. So hoped that maybe if folks are willing, I've got the chat window open here on my screen, and would love to hear who's here, what's your name, what brings you here today, and where might you take these ideas that we talk about today afterwards. So if you're willing to type that.
So we'll take just a minute while people type those in so we have a sense for who's here, and thankful to everybody who is here.
So grateful.
I see Yanti, Suna, Stephanie, Scott, Maureen. There's April. April Leach is in the car. A legendary middle school media literacy teacher, but she's multitasking, so.
That's dedication to join
That's
from
great.
the car.
We understand if you don't enter in the chat, April.
Star. Maureen Tripp, my friend. Nice to see you guys here. Stephanie, pleasure to have you. We're glad you're here.
Cool.
All right, so we'll keep the chat open, and great to welcome everyone who's here. Virginia and I have some of our friends here as well, which is really exciting and nice of them to join us.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking across, I'll kind of introduce what we're going to do. We're going to be talking across a breadth of projects that Virginia and I have been engaged in both together and individually over the last 8 or so years. And our goal is to introduce each of these projects as ways of moving into thinking about careful collaboration. So we'll, in just a second, identify the thread that kind of runs through the conversation today. We'll share a bit about each of these places and some kind of findings from each of those studies that lead us to think about what care looks like in media education and media production kinds of spaces.
Nate and I have had a chance to learn so much across these spaces that in some ways are really different. They are spread out across the country. They are working with very different types of goals to some extent, but there are some things that across those, 8 years, as you said, Nate, we come back to again and again. are these common threads of the role of care in creating and sustaining these kinds of spaces. And particularly care that's co-created and sustained by educators and their students through and around media arts practices. Renee mentioned social emotional learning, and one thing that we'd like to talk about today is the way that media arts practices aren't just like spaces that are nice to have or fun things to do, but they're spaces for us to practice some of those social and emotional learning skills, dispositions, opportunities that we need a space to work in struggle, in collaboration, in community with others in order to put them into practice. We also think it's really important to note across these spaces that this care is not just attributable to individual caring teachers. Of course, the teachers we've known love their students and are dedicated to their students. But we are seeing that there are collaborative relationships that sustain that care, that there are structural supports that create opportunities for care to continue and to be at the center of the work that these educators are facilitating, and that there were sometimes structural barriers that educators had to navigate or contend with in order to enact care for their students. Some of those supports that we'll highlight today across these spaces are opportunities to co-teach, working in community with other teachers, sustained and strategic professional development for out-of-school educators, opportunities for educators to reflect together, and the media arts practices themselves, which involve things like getting feedback, negotiating disagreement, dealing with Adobe suite of software that sometimes isn't going to be the space that that shows you the care you need and makes you work for it a little bit. Nate, you might be muted, I think.
Thank you. We're going to introduce each of these projects, and most of them are research projects, but also some work that we've done to create these kinds of spaces. And we'll share briefly about each of the spaces, kind of what our involvement looked like, and then some ideas about careful collaboration that come from each of them. So I'll start by sharing a place called the Digital Atelier at Mullen High School, which is a high school in Chicago. And this place was created as part of a broader project by a group called Convergence Academies, now Convergence Design Lab, that was about a federally funded whole school reform effort that included efforts to connect teachers and students with media arts education, media producers, digital media artists across the curriculum. And as part of that project, they created this space in the high school called the Digital Atelier. And the Digital Atelier was, and I use the past tense because it's not there anymore, or not being used in the same way, but it was a digital design studio that included use during the day for teachers to come by and schedule and work with digital media artists and media educators. And then during the afternoons, after school, was a drop-in space. And our work was a 2-year ethnographic research project. So we hung out in the space once a week, at least for 2 years, and really quickly identified mentor practices as essential to what was happening. And so we kind of focused on and followed those mentor practices across those 2 years. And the mentors who worked in the space were all digital media artists, practicing digital media artists in Chicago. Some in visual arts, in music, in illustration and design. So they did a range of things, and also had many of them education experience in youth serving organizations or in schools. They would meet weekly together for professional development that they designed, and we attended those meetings, and following those meetings, we would stay for the 90 minutes of drop-in time. The mentors in those meetings focused on adjusting their practice and improving, and I'll share a bit more about that in a second. We, as part of our research, not only observed, but also video and audio recorded what was happening in those meetings, and also in our observations of youth engaging in the space, and conducted interviews, informal and formal, and we've continued to follow up even recently with some of the mentors. So what I'm going to share next is the kind of ideas for careful collaboration that came out of this space. And so for each of the ones we introduce, we'll offer some ideas that then we're looking forward to discussing in the second half of our time together. So here are things that were present both as barriers and as kind of efforts to offer supports and work against barriers in the DA at Mullen High School. The first is that the mentors made specific space and time to focus on professional development together. So they identified this hour in which they were working to improve their own practice, and that extended into their work in the space as well, but they set aside this time. And in the years that we were there, they focused on this principle of leveling up. And they thought about it in two ways. So one was, how could they support students in an interest-driven space? So young people were coming in, choosing to engage in all the different kinds of resources for media production and for making, and help each of those students, support each of those students in moving their own media arts practices to the next step. So students would be at various places, and they would support each of those young people. They would move from person to person and kind of in their meetings identify what students had learned and how they were helping them to move forward in their own practices. And as media educators, that this doesn't look like a curriculum or a step-by-step, but instead some students were engaged with things over long periods of time and became experts and taught others. And some students tried something out for a day and then dropped it, tried something else out and then dropped it, spent some time with something for a couple of weeks, and then tried something else out. So all of those things were happening. The second way in which the mentors thought about leveling up was their own practice. And they were very caring, honest, and open with each other, both in those meetings, and they would reflect coming out of the meeting, sometimes publicly in blog entries, but they also took notes and sharing what they were failing at and learning and doing. But they were also open and honest with each other in communication. There were always at least two of the digital media mentors, the practicing artists after school, and they would share ideas with each other, speak openly about things that they thought about improvement. And I'll just give one example of a conversation that's always stuck out to me. There was a mentor named Luke who, when one of the students had used some homophobic language, pulled that student aside to have a conversation with him. And after the day was over, another mentor, Dawn, who identified as queer, pulled Luke aside and said, "Here's some things I wish you had said," or "Next time, here's some things you could say." And that was received in a way that was just about improvement. And it was kind of a beautiful conversation for me to observe. The mentors also advocated when school barriers propped up. So a couple of the students had made some choices in which they faced school discipline, and that discipline involved the administrator saying that they weren't allowed to go to the DA after school. And the digital media mentors worked with those students to advocate for themselves, to meet with administrators so that they were able to repair whatever they needed to and come back. Students could bring their whole selves into the DA. The conversations in the DA could be about what was happening in their lives and questions and ideas that they had, as much as they were about specific tools. And the mentors also extended their care outside of what was happening in the space into students' lives, and also sometimes in ways outside of the school that they were interacting with students.
Another space we've had an opportunity to spend time in is SpyHop. SpyHop is a youth media arts education organization in Salt Lake City, Utah. In 2019, Nate and I both had an opportunity to spend a week observing separate sessions of SpyHop's Voices of the West program, which is a rural outreach program that takes place in multiple sites across the state. And then in 2020, we had an opportunity to observe their digital pivot year of their rural outreach program. And in 2021, I got to return to Blanding, Utah, which is a town of 3,500 people in the southeast corner of Utah. For Rhode Islanders, it is so far from a Dunkin' Donuts that they won't even tell you on the website where a Dunkin' Donuts is nearby. But SpyHop was presenting these week-long media arts intensives funded by a MacArthur Foundation grant with the goal of counteracting what the MacArthur Foundation had identified as news deserts. This idea that there are locations that did not have local media scenes or local media producers, and that through these week-long media intensives, youth could be empowered as storytellers in and about their communities. Students were paid $250 for their participation and given free lunch throughout the program and met daily from 9 to 3. They were recruited through connections to their teachers, librarians, coaches, SpyHop connecting to wherever there might be youth in these communities. And we saw many of the same things in the caring and the mentorship in SpyHop as we saw at the DA. So Nate, if you would advance that slider, Rooney, for me. Thank you. In the week-long intensive, students had the brief to create 3 short films. They created a thank you letter to an inanimate object, a public service announcement or how-to video, and a community spotlight in which they interviewed a member of their community. And those 3 films, 3 short films, which ranged from about like 3 minutes to 30 seconds to 3 minutes long, would be screened at the end of the week in a public showing in the community. That is a lot of work to accomplish in a week, especially if you're a new filmmaker, new to those equipment. So it created space to collaborate in order to meet challenges. Some of the young people in these communities, in these programs, already knew each other really, really well. Some knew of each other, but maybe didn't know each other in a collaborating or friend space. But in the course of this week, had the opportunity to do that. The mentors also modeled collaboration through their co-teaching. They would create things on the fly and get feedback from each other or look to one another for expertise. And we saw students picking up on that, normalizing not having to be the single auteur or creator of your work, responding and editing and revising based on feedback. There was space and time for mentor reflection here too, in a way that was maybe a little different than the DA because we're all living together in an Airbnb for the week. So eating meals each day and driving the 45 minutes that you had to drive to get to the good grocery store, we had opportunities to talk with one another, reflect, and I include myself and Nate there because we were also living there for those times. And that reflection, because over the week-long program, there was opportunities for immediate action based on that reflection. So the next day going in and saying, all right, we talked about this at dinner. Here's what we're going to try today. The mentors recognize time as a barrier to their opportunities to enact care. They're only there for a week and then they leave and have no continued physical presence in a place that is sometimes 5 or 6 hours from where they're headquartered. And as much as they say at the end of the week, send me an email, keep in touch with me. Folks don't always, but in that limited time, both to do the work and to establish relationships, it led mentors to weigh the kinds of conversations they did or did not have as they described the bandwidth for. Where in the DA, we often saw big, deep conversations about safety and social issues, and structures and systems within the city. Mentors felt that they sometimes didn't have that opportunity to talk with students because they didn't have the chance and time to build the trust that would be necessary to make those conversations safe, which is a kind of care, understanding the limitations of your engagement with young folks and the limitations of the program that you're working with. Mentors over time, especially by year 3 of our work with them, we're also navigating the call of the grant-funded work as a barrier. As mentors got to know the students in the communities and enacted this work that had been funded by this grant, They wondered if the project was based on deficit assumptions of these young people, and if the goal of the project to combat news deserts was ignoring systemic factors that were impacting the rural media landscape in a way that it was unreasonable to ask a group of 12 to 18-year-olds to combat with their homemade films. And that continues to be something that the organization is wrestling with when they are asked to produce a program for youth based on the conception of a funding organization's idea of what youth need or what kind of work needs to be done. What does that mean for their work? And where are there opportunities for them to subvert that? They did subvert it in some ways. The PSA from year one, which was a genre that I think we're all, like, as media arts educators, everyone is familiar with the project of like, pick a passionate issue for you and then make a short film educating people about it. Some young people subverted that in year one and made a satirical PSA and had a lot of fun doing it, and did all of the really cool media production things that you would want them to learn how to do, considering their audience, making really refined edits. They had some After Effects involved too. So in year three, they opened up that project, my hub opened up that project to invite humorous PSAs and to invite satirical work in that second project, which created opportunity again for young people to resonate with each other with joy and silliness, but also take it really seriously, because nobody wants to show a film that's supposed to be funny on the last day and have nobody laugh. So they took that media arts practice and the work of designing for audience really, really seriously.
So the third space we're going to talk about is a little bit different because it's one that we were both involved in creating as opposed to something existing and us joining to observe. It's a place called the Make Good Lab. It's housed in the College of Education at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where I work. It's right across the hall from my office. And we were really grateful to get some support from the university and from our college to create a makerspace media production lab inside the college. So we call it the Make Good Lab, which is a play on our college mission, which is to make good on the promise of public education. And obviously the idea of making and then making good. The Make Good Lab is a space that has two sides. We call one Make Media and the other Make Stuff, because we have on the one side more typical maker space tools and resources for fabrication, 3D printer, wood carving machines, sewing machines, etc. And then the other side, more typical digital media production, including a booth for podcasting, cameras and video production equipment, music production equipment. And you can see in the picture on the right in the background, our beautiful mural, which kind of sets the tone for the space. That's a local Chicago mural artist named Damon Lamar Reed, who created that and helps us to think whenever we're in there about the purpose for the Make Good Lab. I'm going to share some of the things that we've learned. So we do plan to have more opportunities for doing research in the Make Good Lab. It opened in January of 2020, and so almost immediately, and we had done some things beforehand, but almost immediately we obviously had to transition, and so we haven't had the opportunity to more systematically observe and research what's happening, but it's been open as a production space, and so I'll talk about some of the elements of care that we've seen in that space. The first is a really important part of what we wanted to do was to make this openly available to communities in our college, in the university, and then extending beyond. And we have had people engage in the space, participate from families to just recently we had, this was like a week ago, we had an event on a Saturday that was for all admitted students to UIC. And we had families, siblings, parents come hang out and make things, which was really fun. Also staff members in the college. We've had community leaders and folks who are serving in community orgs and youth serving organizations come to meet and to create things. and also to spend time there. It's open for classes. We regularly have classes come in and then students to drop in. So a part of what's possible there is all of these communities having a space to come and participate in the kinds of things that they want to do and that are useful in community work. Sana, who is here, spent some time in the space creating things that were useful for community event that she was part of. And so those kinds of things are possible. I just wanted to highlight too a surprise related to the groups that the space is open to is we didn't necessarily anticipate that staff members. So these are folks who work in our student services staff and also work in accounting would spend time coming down just to create things, that this was a space for them in a workspace that's really different, you know, from faculty or from students. A second way in which the Make Good Lab is open for kind of welcoming and opportunities for care is that people peek in, just what is this place? And are welcomed. Virginia was our inaugural Maker in Residence opportunity to be in the space to welcome people in and give them opportunities to try out new things. A barrier, and we've sort of noticed this across our projects, is sustainability. University supports for staffing and open hours. We have received some external funding that's made that possible, and we've done some hustling around that. But without those systems that make it possible to have staff and to be open, we run into a challenge, obviously, of how people are able to use the space.
The final space we're going to talk about today is the Hartford Public Library U Media space. And this was a space I had the opportunity to spend 7 weeks doing my dissertation research on and researching with the young people, librarians, and media mentors who worked there. U Media is a drop-in space where people aged 13 to 19 were welcome to come in and hang out, mess around, geek out, similar to the ethos of the Digital Atelier. Hartford is a mid-sized urban city where many of its members are experiencing systemic poverty and other challenges. This is a free space within a beautiful library in Hartford's downtown, which the library also, like, it's situated on the second floor of a library that has a cafe that involves training programs for people who are looking to enter food service roles or restaurant roles. There is a audio booth right outside of U Media where volunteers can come create audiobooks on request for people who are vision impaired. There are immigration support services, beautiful children's area. So it's a giant 3-4 multi-use library space. And most of the second floor is given to a space for young people to play video games, engage in cosplay production. There's a recording booth in there, and all those other things that we've done. 3D printers, everyone's got a 3D printer, arts and crafts supplies, everything else. And the next slide there. A few things to mention that stand out as structural supports and barriers here. One that I think is really, really important to consider is that as this was a space within a space, everyone in the library was on board with the mission of U Media as a space for young people, adolescents, who often don't have a space, in the words of one of the librarians there, to just exist. There aren't many places in a city where a young person can just exist on a summer's day. Everyone was committed to the mission and understood this is a different kind of library space. Sometimes it gets loud, sometimes the bass is thumping, but that they were greeted by everybody in the library with respect and care as guests, just as everyone else is. And I only mention that because I know that's not always the case in spaces for adolescents. The security guards came in regularly just to play video games on their break as a way of getting to know the young people. The kind of care too, and this is when my eyes are going to get like starry and heart eyes for libraries. One of the librarians there described to me, look, we're librarians, we connect people to resources. Their understanding of their role was so comprehensive in the lives of young people, including connecting them to legal services when they needed it, food and housing services for youth who are queer, social services when we in the space that summer experienced loss of one of the members who unfortunately died, it was a space of grieving and emotional support and care, and just a space to be. So that sense of what their role was so comprehensive, and that understanding was just, we connect people to resources, whether those resources are FL studios and being able to make a beat, or the kind of social supports that they may not be connected to elsewhere. Another barrier that a barrier that they faced was that there's an age limit. This is supposed to be a teen space, and what the librarians and mentors were noticing was there were people over 19 who still had use, need, and belonging in that space. And to combat this and work around it, UMedia staff created a program called Legends. They called these young folks who had been participating for a long time, these are our legends. And they had continued access to the space, initially kind of restricted to particular hours. And then over time, just kind of opening up, they recognized that Legends continued to give mentorship and education to other people in sustaining care in the space. They taught people to do what they were doing, and they modeled types of participation as options. And at its core, the mentors just recognized these were folks who turning 20 didn't mean they didn't still need a space of care. And there weren't other spaces like that for them. It's a navigation of a barrier.
So that's our half hour, introducing the various kind of projects that we've been involved in, that we hope share with you kind of breadth of different sorts of places that have structures for care and in which we've observed significant care, and also the barriers that are present inside of those spaces. So as we break into groups, we would invite you to consider these questions, and we'll be able to come back. I think it's about 15 minutes in our breakout groups, and then we'll come back and be able to have a conversation for the rest of the time about what we learned and talked about and thought about. So I will get those questions into the chat so we can see them as you move into your breakout spaces, and I'll hand it off to Renee for whatever the process is for doing that.
Beautiful. Oh, okay. Thanks, Nate, for putting the questions into the chat room. We're going to break you into 3 groups. This is a great networking opportunity. Please take the time to introduce yourself to each other before you begin tackling 1, 2, or all 2 of those questions. Give me a thumbs up if you understand what's going to happen. The rooms are going to open. You're going to get an invitation. You're going to make a new friend. You're going to have a great conversation. Then we'll come back and do some synthesis. Rooms are open. Okay, everybody's back, right? Good show. We're so happy you're back. And what we thought we would do in this session right now is just invite you to do some reflection on one or more ideas that was meaningful to you in the small group breakout room. So who wants to go first? What was a meaningful idea that came up in the breakout room for you, Kate Dalton?
Oh, wow. Lots of good ideas. I learned that Emerson has a program for college called Immersion for students, which is comparable to an advisory program in high schools. And we were talking about that as a potential structure where we could work these types of things in.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Kat, what was an idea that came up in the small group breakout room that was intriguing or interesting to you?
Kate was sharing something that she's working on called Mock Tracker, and I love the underpinnings of her pedagogy around that and why she's bringing it forward. And I'd love to learn more about it, Kate, at some point.
Thanks so much. Rachel, how about you? What was an idea that came up in the small group discussion that was useful or interesting to you?
Great, thanks. We talked a lot about just how can we have a source that can help people implement different media spaces in their own space, and what would that look like? Not necessarily more reading or different things to look like, but actual practice that they are being able to experience in other people, in other people's spaces.
Cool. So some needs assessment there. Thank you so much for sharing. Yanti, how about in your group? What was an idea that came up that
So
was
we
meaningful
were
to
with
you?
Rachel. That's exactly with April. That's exactly what we talked about. The need to experience it and to feel, because everybody needs, Virginia and Nathan, you shared with us so many examples that are unique, right? And I'm not sure that the people that in one location would use what the other location was using because of the uniqueness. Like yesterday, I was just talking with a rural youth media organization saying, I cannot find anything about rural youth media like what our setting. So inviting people, Rachel was saying from her experience working with teachers, inviting people into the classroom, but maybe there is a way to do like we've been doing VVH, the virtual viral hangouts, like support system kind of with those kind of 1 hour, but maybe having people be able either be via video or conferencing, like experience what it is, the practice itself, not reading another academic article.
Aha, intriguing. So there's some idea generation that was useful. Alex, what's one topic that came up in your small group meeting that was useful, or a point you want to underline for us all?
Sure. I don't know if it's just going to come across as a complaint, but as a media professional working in higher education, we find when we're a grant-funded organization, we find a challenge for our PIs to actually advocate for science communication products, for digital media products, because it's not part of their skill set. So they're risk averse to basically seeing those opportunities as potential risks to solving their normal funding problems. So that's an institutional challenge that we see.
So important to recognize. Suna, what was an idea that came up in the small group that was meaningful to you?
I'm in Alexis group, and I agree with Alex's concerns, and Virginia also shared about her experiences. So yeah, I think that's all we shared in a group.
Awesome. Okay, the floor is open. Who wants to pipe up and offer some reflection on what your small group discussion tackled, a point maybe that hasn't been mentioned that you want to raise? The floor is open.
Something that I have is maybe even kind of a question coming out of our conversations. One of the things that Virginia and I tried to do, and I don't know how successfully we did this, but is identify that care in these kinds of spaces involves practice of care aligned with or in connection with collaboration with practices of media arts, and that media arts education and media arts production is maybe not uniquely, but certainly affords opportunities to do this in ways that aren't possible always in other kinds of settings or spaces. So the idea of practice says, but also practice in the sense of, working to improve. So that's one thought. And then a second is across our examples, but then also in some of the things that we've discussed. And I don't know if Rachel shared this in her group. She works with teachers and in schools now, but part of her work with multimodal and media producers and makers was with a group of older adults in a GED preparation program. And some of these people had whole families and were grandparents and were involved now in kind of a community effort. And those age groups, Virginia talked about the legends who sort of have moved out of youth spaces and adults. I'm not sure, and Renee, you would know this, others would know this, if we have great opportunities for adults and older adults and people sort of moving out of school and youth spaces. And so that's another kind of question I have, and I'd be interested in the kinds of work that people do or thoughts about that.
Virginia, you get the last word.
That means I have to unmute. I think a major thing that's come across this work and these conversations for me today is that when we consider care and education in media arts spaces, it is interpersonal, it's personal, and it's systemic. All those things, there's the like personal work you're doing on your own pose towards learning and possibility, and structures that you're experienced with, as like Yanti and Rachel were mentioning. What do you know is possible? What have you personally experienced? And as Alex mentioned, this idea of like, where are you unwilling to move? We're also acknowledging that like the precarity and that these spaces exist within because of their reliance on funding from outside sources creates many barriers, including questions of what it means when these spaces close. It's very hard for us without funding to research what happens after the funding goes, to find out what happens, what does it mean to have a space that's really meaningful to people and then to have it taken away. And I describe it as taken away because I know for me that's what it's felt like before when that's happened. Whether someone just says, hey, we funded this for 15 years and it's run its course, for me I still liked going there on Sunday and miss it. So those understanding from our internal, our interpersonal, and our systemic factors that sustain these spaces.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I would like to, let's give Nate and Virginia a big round of applause. Thank you so much for being part of our conversation today. I want to just take just a minute and share my screen with you because, Yanti, you and I have been practicing the intersection of care and collaboration for 9 years now with the Summer Institute in Digital Literacy. We absolutely put care and collaboration at the very center. And this summer, just as Virginia and Nate are kind of the Rhode Island, Chicago power couple, right? We also have a deep partnership with Rhode Island and Chicago because this summer, for the first time, we're going to be holding the Summer Institute fully online and in Chicago. So why don't you join us? And not to mention join us next week. We have a really cool program next week where we're talking about transcultural information literacies. We're talking about how do we support graduate students who come from countries like China, where censorship is the norm, and they arrive here to a free and unfettered and crazy media system. And how do graduate students learn to navigate in a world where information quality and quantity is plentiful? And then, of course, the week after that, our final Media Logs showcase. We're looking at about 36 folks who had the opportunity to collaborate across cultures to explore the topic of contemporary propaganda and disinformation. So definitely would be happy to have you join us for any and all of those. We're going to sign off now with a wave like we always do at the Media Education Lab. You had to get a great chance to make some new friends today and so hear from some thought leaders in the field. Thanks for joining us. I'm Renee Hobbs and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.